Imagine you hire the best mechanic in the world. He's brilliant, experienced, and he knows exactly how to fix your cars. But on day one, you hand him a screwdriver and a giant ethics manual, and you tell him, every single time you touch this tool, stop and make sure that tightening this screw will not harm humanity. Not before doing something dangerous, not before cutting the brakes or something, every single time they touch a screw. That mechanic won't suddenly become bad at his job. You gave him a terrible operating system. And that is basically my problem with Claude Code. I don't think Claude models are bad. In fact, for some things, I think Claude models are still the best in the world. But Claude Code, the harness around the model, is often not the best way to use it. So this is not a Claude sucks video in any way, shape, or form. This is more like stop defaulting to Claude Code just because everyone on X told you to. I'm going to show you where Claude Code falls short, where Claude models are still the best, and which coding agents I'd actually use depending on the job. So how did we get here? How did we go from ChatGPT being the tool that pretty much introduced AI to the world to Anthropic becoming the most valuable AI startup in 2026? The first big sign of this happening came late last year when Opus 4.5 came out. Claude Code became the default for two reasons. First, Opus 4.5 made Claude feel magical for coding at exactly the moment non-engineers were getting into app building. Anthropic called Opus 4.5 its best model for coding, agents, and computer use, and the launch was clearly positioned around agentic work. Second, Anthropic got a massive public opinion boost during the Pentagon dispute. The details were messy, but the internet version was simple. Anthropic became the principal AI company, and OpenAI became the evil AI that lets the government do whatever they want. Emphasis on the quotes here, as I don't believe that to be true, but I definitely think it came off that way to the public eye, and for the purpose of this video, that's what matters. The combination made Claude Code feel like the safe, smart default, but default does not mean the best. The demand shift was massive. Anthropic starts doing a bunch of questionable moves because they can't even keep up with all the people getting rid of ChatGPT and switching to Claude, while this is also feeding the fire that had been going on since late 2025 of the hype cycle around Claude Code. And sure enough, we get to today, where Anthropic is about to IPO at a valuation that is higher than the latest OpenAI valuation. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I think it's important for you to understand two things with this video. Number one is people aren't just dumb because they're using Claude Code. There is a context behind why it became so popular, and that is what I'm trying to make obvious with this short bit of context on the video. But number two, and that is the key point of this video, is that there are other options, and those options are probably better for a lot of the work that you guys are doing right now. Now, for another very important tangent that we really need to go on here so we're all clear on where Claude Code falls short of a lot of its competitors. The main issue with Claude Code and the Claude desktop app is the agent harness. The harness is the plumbing that's built around the LLM for the LLM to be able to do real work. LLM being large language model. Let me explain. At the core of an AI agent is an LLM. The LLM is the model that you talk to when you open ChatGPT or Claude. You can look at it as a program that takes text, or sometimes images, as input and outputs text. You ask a question in text, and it replies back to you in text. That's basically what an LLM does, and thus why it's called a large language model. It's meant to work with language. The big breakthrough was the realization that we could make these models do work for us. We could build a system around them that gives them arms and legs to do work, not just mouth and ears to talk to us. Imagine you create a super intelligent being, but it has no arms and no legs. It can't move or act. It's kind of like an 8-ball or some sort of oracle. You ask a question and it replies, but that's it. What we did to change that was we bolted some robotic arms and legs into the oracle so it could start taking action. The LLM still only outputs text, but we use that text to let it take real actions on a computer by letting it output text to a computer terminal, for example. The terminal allows the LLM to take any sort of action on your computer. We also must explain to the LLM what tools it can use and in what situations. For example, if the task requires it to read a file, it should call the read tool. If it needs to edit a file, it calls the write tool. These tools are made available to the LLM via something called the agent harness. It's part of the prompt that the LLM receives when you ask your AI agent to do something, just you don't see it. It's the agent provider that has coded that into the agent that you're using. So when you send a message to your AI agent, what the LLM at the core actually sees is much more than just the message you sent. It receives things like the system prompt, which explains the general context of what its role is and what it can and cannot do, and an index of tools that it can call, all through text, so it can take actions when it needs to. This is, of course, a simplistic view of what an agent harness is. But the core thing I need you to understand here is that the harness is all the plumbing that is built around an LLM to let it take real actions in your computer. It explains to the LLM what it is supposed to do, what it can and cannot do, and what tools it has available to call so it can do the job the user asks it to do. If you want to talk more about the agent harness, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video dedicated just to this topic. But for now, that is enough for what we need to understand about Claude Code. Remember, the mechanic forced to check the ethics manual before every screw? That manual, those instructions, that whole setup, that's the harness. The model is the mechanic, and a bloated harness can tank a brilliant model's performance. Not because the model got dumb, but because you buried it in instructions and tools that it has to go through every time it acts. That's how the same LLM performs completely different in Claude Code versus, say, Cursor or Replit or Lovable. Now, I don't want this to become just vibes, so let's look at benchmarks that test agents doing real work, and let's see what happens. All right, so let's talk about some benchmarks and some objective comparisons of how Claude does inside of Claude Code, outside of Claude Code, and then compare to other models like GPT models. The one that I want to show you first is Terminal Bench. So Terminal Bench compares CLI coding tools, so only in the terminal, not the desktop apps. But this one I particularly like to show because it makes really clear the difference that you can obtain in results by using Claude in Claude Code or outside of Claude Code. So look at the difference here. If you look at Opus 4.6 being used inside of Claude Code here, you get an accuracy score of 58%. Now, if you take the same Opus 4.6 and you use it inside of the Droid agent, which is pretty good, you get an accuracy of 69.9%. So basically 70%. It's more than 10% difference in accuracy for the same exact model, which is insane. This is the kind of evidence that tells us how bloated the Claude Code harness is and how the Claude Code harness isn't doing the model any favors. The model is capable of a lot more than sometimes seems when being used instead of Claude Code. Another example here with 4.5, you can look at 4.5 inside of Claude Code here, where it gives you a 52%, and then you look at Droid again, and it's 63%, around 10% difference again. And you can even look at Terminus here on Opus 4.5. It also outperforms by a decent margin. So you get the point here. Claude Code is not the best way to use Claude models, objectively speaking, at least looking at these benchmarks. The benchmark I want to show you next is a new one. Deep SWE is so far, I think, the best benchmark for you to go to. If a new model comes out and you want to see where does this stand in terms of cost, time, or output tokens, this is the one that I would go for, because this seems like it has the best snapshot of what is going right now when I compare it to my experience using these models. So this might seem a little bit out of scope here because we're not comparing Claude inside of Claude Code or outside of Claude Code. We're just comparing the model itself, the LLM, against other models. But my point here is if you're doing something that isn't UI, because Deep SWE focuses mostly on backend tasks, there's a very big gap between Opus 4.8, the latest Claude model, and GPT 5.5, which has been out for longer. Even GPT 5.4 on X-High outperforms Claude Opus 4.8 on High. So in terms of software engineering backend in general, there is a big difference. Now, UI is not as easy to diagnose, evaluate, because it's not objective. Like anything that isn't objectively quantifiable it's very hard to say which model is the best because there's always a certain element of subjectivity. You might like one type of UI design, I might prefer another, and one may objectively not be better than another except for obvious things like user experience issues and so on. But because of that, I've run a benchmark and made Opus 4.8 on Claude Code design a SaaS dashboard and a landing page. And I've made it do the same thing, but within the cursor harness instead of Claude Code. I've also done the same with Cursor's Composer 2.5 model, just because I think it's really cool, and with Codex as a control group. So you can compare the results from Codex with the results from Claude Code. So here is the first one. I'm going to zoom in so you can see the elements. This is Opus 4.8 on Claude Code. You can see there's some animations and some shadows going on here. Not too bad. There's some like wiggling that doesn't make sense. Like, why does this all this wiggles? This is cool. I like this animation. Seems smooth. In general, not bad. It's pretty good. This is animated properly. So to tell you what happened here, I just told it general prompt, make up a SaaS. It can be whatever you want. Come up with a color palette and then design a SaaS dashboard. And then we're going to see a landing page. The only indications I gave it was use Next.js, use Shadcn and Tailwind, and that was it. It could do everything else it wanted. I also asked for 5 different variations, as you can see here, but I'm not going to focus too much on this because I don't think the variations are that different in a way that it's worth talking about each one individually. One thing I wanted to talk about is this Claudism here that is almost gone from the other variations. I don't know if I just got lucky, but it's in here. You see this outline here. If you see this type of design anywhere, you know that a Claude model was used to code that element. This was something that Claude would just slap on everywhere. Surprisingly, it's not on the others. The other sidebars don't have this, but there is another very obvious Claudism, which is the sidebar itself. I don't know why these models love sidebars. They never put bars on the top. It's always a sidebar, and it's always kind of the same. Claude here kind of got the hang of the structure from a Shadcn sidebar, but it could have done a lot better. This bar is super boring. There's no user here. The user on Shadcn bars is usually down here. Instead, Claude put it there. The bar is a bit boring. The design is not the best, but it's definitely not bad. It's very much usable. I don't see like any obvious flaws, anything that would make me dislike this. It's pretty good. The next one I want to show you is the same Claude Opus 4.8, but this time in the cursor harness. So the cursor harness is definitely doing something better here. I don't know if it's just not relying on the bloat from the Claude Code harness, or if Cursor's actually added some magic here to make Claude models work better with Shadcn, for example, because there are things here that I really like. They're a lot better. For example, this thing here. See this? The filters here, the difference between this and this, just the large margins and padding on here versus this. This to me just looks so much cleaner. This is one example. The other example is that it got right what should not wobble. Notice how the cards still bounce a bit. That's fine for these top cards, but these components down here, they don't wobble around like on the standard Claude. That's another nice improvement. The other thing is the sidebar. The sidebar has a workplace switcher. It has the user down here, which is really interesting. And it has this fleet status component, which just makes the design look nicer. In general, I think the sizing is different. Just the way the icons, the spacing looks cleaner, the margins and the padding between menu items looks cleaner. So you can see that it's the exact same model, and you can tell that it's the same model. I mean, there was no direction here at all. The model was free to just come up with 5 different styles and do it however it wants, but there's a common thread here. As you can see, it's the same model. It's just on the cursor harness, it comes out nicer. See, the Claudism here is gone as well on the editorial style. There's no Claudism there on that element, which is pretty cool. So that is Opus 4.8 on the cursor harness. Now this one, This one is really cool. This is Cursor's Composer 2.5, and it's not as good, obviously, but it's a way cheaper model, and this took 5 minutes where the others took 25 to 30 minutes to go through the whole thing, because they built the whole palette, the brand, all the components from Chatsien, all of that. They got all the components from Chatsien and customized them, all of that. This took 5 minutes. Pretty impressive when the Frontier models are taking 25 to 30. Granted, I tested them on high or X high. I tested them all on the same reasoning effort, but it wasn't low or anything like that. It was high or X high because I wanted to push it and see how it went. But still, for a really cheap model like Composer 2.5, 5 minutes, it's pretty good. There's issues here, especially the editorial ones clearly has issues. The bars are weird. They're not real graphs anyway. The text feels like it's squished or something. There are issues, but if you like to have like an interactive coding experience instead of just prompting it out and letting it do its job, if you like to go back and forth and iterate quickly, have a model that goes back and forth, iterates quickly, I would highly recommend you check out Composer 2.5. I was very surprised. It's a very good model, especially in terms of value, the price for what you get for the price. I don't know if there's anything like it. And then we've got the Codex example, just for comparison's sake. This is what Codex did. I don't think OpenAI models are as good at UI. I've said it before. It's usable, it's decent, but it's very large margins, very large everything. I'm not a fan of that. It animated things, yes, nicely. There is the shadow overflows from one card to the other. See, when I highlight here, shadow comes up on this side. When I highlight this, look at that. See, there's a shadow overflowing onto the others. Not a fan of that. So, I mean, it's usable, but I think the Claude version is better. The sidebar is not that good. There's no user drop down on the sidebar or on the top. There's this, but I guess this would be like users that are online now or something. Anyway, the thing with Codex is I use Codex more than any other, or I've used Codex more than the other models to do UI, but it works because if you have a large body of like references, examples, markdown files that explain how you want things to be done, how you want your unified component library to be used, how you want your styling to be done, and examples, Codex does a really good job. But it needs that element of steering. It's not like Opus where you get pretty cool UI out of the box. So if you just want to stick to one, I'd still say Codex because the backend capability is night and day. And the UI, you can get it there. You can get it to be as good as, you just need to give it more direction. Now for the landing pages. So this is the landing page that we did with Opus 4.8 on Claude Code. Now, immediately there are issues here that you can see the spacing here, the lack of spacing here between the logos bar and this component here. This component is just all over the place. There's this green animation thing. There's just tons of text, a lot of stuff going on. Like if I'm landing on this page, I wouldn't know where to look first because it's so much in my face. This is pretty boring, pretty standard. Like these icons at this point now, you immediately tell if something's vibe coded, like with not much love. When you look at these icons and you already know it's like the standard icons that the models put out. For some reason, the first and the last have time stamps. The others don't have time stamps. Like this is larger. There are issues here. There are definitely issues. It's not bad. I like this kind of framer template aesthetic that they're going for here. There's some movement, there's some animations, but there's layout issues here and there. And it's not bad. But you'll see the one on Cursor with the same Opus 4.8 is better. But before that, let's look at the other two. So Composer 2.5 on Cursor did this in 1/4 of the time or something, like 5 minutes instead of 20 or something. The landing pages went faster than the dashboard, but Composer was still way faster. And it's not bad. I mean, it's not as good. Again, there are issues. I actually kind of like this demo better because it's less in your face. You can kind of get what's going on here compared to this, where it's like, what is happening, you know? This is all right. The demo is not bad. The structure, I like this structure, and I'll talk more about this when I show you the Codex version. But of course, it's not as good. There's like this here is not formatted properly. There are issues with it's much more monotonous. You don't have more different sections to make the page more dynamic. But again, for a model this cheap and this quick, again, if your workflow is more like iterating back and forth with the model, I would try this for sure. Now, Codex here is revealing, like GPT 5.5 is revealing the usual UI quirks of the GPT models. One of them is it likes to put a large piece of text with a title and a subtitle on one side of the hero, and then put some sort of a weird demo on the left, right beside the title. It didn't work out here, so it has this open area on the right for some reason, and then the demo is below it. The demo is all right, but again, it's very basic, not very inspired, not very dynamic. The sections kind of all look the same. This doesn't look very nice. It's boring. The logo is basically an icon that it took from somewhere. The bars got some glass morphism there, but it doesn't look that pretty. Now let me show you what we got Opus 4.8 with Cursor. One thing I really like here is this top bar. Look how it blends in when it gets to the top and then gets this glass morphism effect. Granted, there's no space at the top, which is a problem, but I really like that it did this. It's pretty cool. The demo here is still not great, but the way the space is being utilized is nicer. There's more breathing room. The elements feel more intentional. This feels a lot more intentional. Like if you look at the original Claude Code one, there's these boring icons. The structure seems similar, so the model, again, the brain is the same, but it executes a lot better here. So this looks a lot more intentional, less vibe coded, less boring than this low effort thing. There's more diverse sections, which is nice. I like the demos that it made. I like these numbers. The table is not the best, but it's not bad. You see, there's more polish to it. There's more diversity to it. There's more intentionality. It seems like it just outputs better UI when it's being used in Cursor versus when it's being used in Claude Code. Again, this is especially noticeable for broad prompting. If you just like give it a prompt, go away, let it do its thing, and then come back. If you're being more intentional, if you're giving examples, if you're giving it like a markdown structure with your design systems and your components and your design guidelines, then this becomes less of a problem. So the point is not that one leaderboard should decide your whole workflow. The point is that Claude Code is not automatically the king just because it became the cultural default. Now, other than the front end, there is something else that Claude models are better at than any other model. Claude models are the best at understanding what you want and what is relevant to what you want without much steering. Don't get me wrong, GPT models can and will get there with the proper steering, especially when it comes to building software. But Claude models seem to just get you, and when the goal is to brainstorm an idea or just chat about something that is not technical, Claude definitely wins. I've been saying this for a while, but while everyone used ChatGPT to talk about life, Claude has actually been the best choice to talk to and brainstorm ideas. Funny enough, Claude is now famous for Claude Code and coding, which in my opinion is a category that is clearly led by OpenAI and Codex. So most people are actually using the wrong model for the wrong task. If you need to consider the pros and cons of a business idea, or if you just want to brainstorm what you could do for a side gig or just something like that that's open-ended and requires a certain understanding of what you're going for, Claude usually shines there compared to ChatGPT. This brings us to our verdict for when should we use each tool. Let's start with coding and software. If you're working on UI, Claude tends to be better, ideally in a harness that is not Claude Code. But even in Claude Code, if you want to make the most of the subsidization and the subscriptions, it tends to outperform the GPT models in Codex out of the box. Key idea here being out of the box, because with proper steering, you can definitely get GPT models there. But with Claude, it generally puts out better UI without much steering, just out of the box. And when it comes to backend, GPT models have been unbeatable for a while. So if you want properly built systems with not much steering, and yes, GPT 5.5 is that good, then you should definitely be working in OpenAI's Codex app with GPT 5.5. Or not. you can use GPT 5.5 with your incredibly generous OpenAI subscription in any harness that you want. Unlike Anthropic, which forces you to use Claude Code unless you're willing to pay the much more expensive API prices, OpenAI lets you use your subscription anywhere. So you can go crazy and play with GPT 5.5 and stuff like OpenCode, Pi, which I definitely recommend you check out if you like to tinker with your agents, or even stuff like OpenClaw or Hermes. If you want an LLM that you can just chat to and brainstorm ideas or ask about your day-to-day questions, then that's different. Then I'd say use Claude. Usually it's a better experience for me in these situations. However, this is something that I'll expect GPT 5.6 to improve on too, because 5.5 was a big jump in quality from the previous versions of the 5 series. Just like the UI thing, I believe OpenAI is actively improving its models to feel nicer to talk to. 5.5 has come a long way from the times of 5.1, 5.2, and even 5.3 that were just atrocious models to casually chat. So all in all, if you want slightly more taste and the feeling that the model gets you out of the box, go for Claude, ideally outside of Claude Code. If you want the job done right on the first try, reliably, go for GPT 5.5 on Codex. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.